Thank you, Teresa. It's really good to have you. Today we have Teresa Blythe with us, and Teresa is working in spiritual direction. She is a discernment coach. She has been doing work in spiritual direction and discernment coaching since 1997. And more recently, she's become a ministry consultant at Shepherd Heart, where I work, and that's where I've gotten to know her a little bit better. But I thought it would be nice to introduce Teresa and her work more fully to the pastors in the churches who visit Shepherd Heart, and just ask you a little bit more about your work in spiritual direction, because you have founded the Center for Spiritual Direction in Phoenix in 2015, and before that, for 14 years, you were the director of the Hezekiah School of Spiritual Direction. You are an author. You have a book coming out this January that I'm excited to learn more about. You have another book called 50 Ways to Pray and Spiritual Direction 101, the basics of spiritual guidance. And so I figured you would be the absolute perfect person to ask. What is spiritual direction?
I'm glad you asked. I love to talk about spiritual direction. It's not only my life, it's a calling. It's just, it's everything to me. Spiritual direction is a practice of meeting, usually about once a month, with a person who's been trained in the art of spiritual direction to talk about where you're experiencing God or maybe not experiencing God. All of your life really is spiritual. So you might bring what you're going through, what you've been through in the last month. And we really deal with the material differently than a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
We look at, okay, how are you experiencing God? And what do you want from God? You know, Jesus asked that question all the time. What do you want? What do you need?
Great point.
So we ask that of people who come to spiritual direction. And there's a lot of little phrases we use to describe spiritual direction. And one of them is, it's a long, loving look at the real.
And a long, loving look at the real. I love that.
Well, I didn't make that up. Walter Berghatt, a Jesuit spiritual director, that's his definition of contemplation. Since spiritual direction is a contemplative practice, we've kind of adopted that. And it's looking at paying attention to what matters. That's kind of the generic way I describe it sometimes. But there are three things that I like to talk about people can come to spiritual direction for. One, they want a greater awareness of God.
Okay.
Somehow or another, they're not feeling it, or they just want to talk about, how do I become more aware of God? Second is to reflect on their life, or maybe an experience in their life, or maybe just looking back at where God has been active for them in the past. And then the third is discernment. And that's where people are trying to make decisions in life that are in line with their values, their beliefs, and their understanding of what God wants for them. So then the discernment coaching, it's really spiritual direction, but I do it sometimes with groups and with church boards, that kind of thing. But with individuals, it's one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
Well, where are you feeling called? And a clergy person, they may take 2 years or more in discernment before they find the next call. It starts with, how do I, how am I feeling about this present call? Am I feeling restlessness? So when I work with clergy, it's fascinating because, they have an opportunity to take their time.
That's wonderful. So if I were a pastor, which I am, or maybe a member of a church, which I also am, what is it like going to spiritual direction for the very first time?
That's important. A lot of people just want to know, what does it look like? It looks like two people in a room with the director being very welcoming and warm. And the first session, I might talk with the person about what I do in spiritual direction, how I do spiritual direction. And then I ask them if that's what they're looking for. So we kind of get that, that understanding, because I want them to know that what I'll be doing is really deeply listening. I'll be listening to what they're saying, to how they say it, listening to myself for, where's the Spirit moving? What do I notice? I will be reflecting a few things back to them, and I may ask a few open-ended questions. That's basically what I do. So they come with material. So I do ask my directees to have some regular spiritual practice. It doesn't really matter what it is, something that connects them to the holy. And then if they're doing that regularly, they have things to talk about usually. So, but we talk about things that happen in daily life as well. It doesn't have to be specifically spiritual. We don't have to talk just about God or spirit, but the human person. You know, we're incarnations. So our lives matter, and so I listen to all kinds of stories. So it's about 45 minutes to an hour of real contemplative, meaning kind of slow moving.
Okay.
Maybe some silence, maybe some prayer. It's really what the directee wants. I find out a little bit about their spiritual tradition and what they're comfortable with, how comfortable they are with silence. That's important. And then we just go from there. I say, well, what would you like to explore today in spiritual direction? And they begin.
And it's left kind of open-ended to whatever it needs to be.
There's one thing more I want to say about it so that people know. It is a completely confidential process.
Okay.
I mean, we have mandatory reporting. We have some boundaries where we have to report some things. I go over that with them.
Yeah.
But what they say to me is not going to go on. It's not going to be on the street, you know.
So the things that people share with you stay with you. And I know as a ministry consultant at Shepherd Heart too, you're a mandated reporter and you take all those responsibilities really seriously. Most pastors are mandated reporters in most states anyway. So thank you for clarifying that, what the limits of confidentiality are, and that the things stay in the room between the three of you, right?
The other thing I want to emphasize is that we're trained, and if you get someone that doesn't do this, just run. But we're trained to be non-judgmental and to have no agenda for you. So you're not coming to a spiritual director to be handheld and here, let's go this way, you know, pastor, or this is what you should do. No,
okay.
It's listening and helping you find that wisdom that God has placed in you. You know, God in Deuteronomy, it says it's not too far away. It's not, somebody doesn't have to go get it for you. It's written on your heart. We help people discover what's written on their heart.
That's beautiful. I was just going to ask you, what are some ways that you can determine whether the spiritual director that you have come to is a good spiritual director for you?
Well, I would want him or her to be trained in some way. And I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But trained, but also I want them to really listen. So like I have this high standard for my spiritual directors because I know what I want. I want them to listen, no judgment, no agenda. If I start to feel pulled in a certain way, or if you feel like you can't say something to them because you might hurt their feelings or you might whatever, you've detected like a block. It's perfectly okay just to say, you know, I think I need something different, and then go on to someone else. We're trained not to, you know, we don't chase after people. We don't find out why they don't want to come. It's just a sometimes personal preference.
So you would recommend to the directee just to say, I'm not feeling that this is a fit. If they notice a certain block, like they don't feel open and safe to talk to their director, you're saying it's okay just to tell them it isn't a fit for me, and the spiritual director won't come after them.
No, and I try to really be, you know, not take it personally. In fact, I'll say, well, tell me what you're looking for and I'll help you find that person. I know other spiritual directors. And so lots of times it's just little things. It's personal preference. Some people want to see a man, want to see a woman, want to see an ordained clergy. Some people want to see not an ordained clergy. So some people want to see people outside of their tradition. and some want someone that really gets their tradition.
Mm-hmm. And your tradition, you're ordained in the UCC Church, the United Church of Christ. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did. And we have a motto in our church. It's very well known. It's that God is still speaking.
Amen.
We wanted to kind of distinguish ourselves from churches that said, well, revelation and ongoing revelation stopped somewhere back there, and it's not, we don't have it anymore. We say God is still speaking, which is perfect for me as a spiritual director, because I believe that, and my job is to listen and help people listen.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I love that. So I will ask you, what are some of the ways that a spiritual director should prepare themselves for this kind of work before they become a spiritual director?
Great. They should be in spiritual direction for at least a year.
Okay, so their own spiritual direction. Okay.
And most programs require it.
Okay.
They want you to experience it. If you want to be a spiritual director, but you don't want to be in it, then, that would be a big question mark. Like, well, why? What are you thinking it is?
Mm-hmm.
You don't know what it is. So you need to be in spiritual direction. That's the biggest way to prepare.
So probably in a first meeting, it would be really fruitful to have these kinds of conversations with your spiritual director to get a sense of what kind of fit it might be. Would that be a recommendation for that kind of conversation to take place early on between a directee and a director?
Yes, what I do, I have a little intake.
Okay.
I do like 15 minutes. And we talk about, I tell them what I do and how I do it. Is that what you're looking for?
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't want to do the intake, then I do that at the beginning of the first session.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But yes, you need to see just if you click. Just if
Mm-hmm.
you feel warm, do you feel safe? Is this, some people don't even want to walk into a church. So if you've got an office in a church, that's, they may say, I'm feeling kind of strange being here. So yeah, definitely in your first session, tell everything you need to tell about your comfort level.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. That's really helpful. I'm curious, what are some ways to expect spiritual direction to have an impact in who we are and how we live?
Well, you can't really do an evaluation on, the spirit.
Right.
But I see things, you do see things. You see people beginning to pray more, to be more for their personal beliefs, to become more in line with who they are. And a lot of people will come when they're kind of shifting from one kind of Christianity to another, that kind of thing. But I have been so blessed to work with about 3 people for over 10 years.
Wow.
I've seen them through all kinds of life changes. I've seen them go from like one job to the next. I worked with one clergy person for 2 years in discernment. It began with just a little bit of wanting to be back home. And it moved from there. Well, can I leave this job? It's a really good job. I like this congregation. And it moved. We just worked for 2 years on where's the Spirit leading. And they're now at a really beautiful job. They found a life partner, which they didn't have before. And I just, whenever I see her posting on Facebook, I just get really warm feeling.
Oh, that's lovely. Well, I was going to ask you a couple more questions that I think you've already answered, like how often do you meet? But you mentioned that monthly is often really good for people to meet. It
is. That again, that's how we're different from therapy.
Mm-hmm.
We want more time in between. It cuts down on dependence. So we want people to become dependent on us, and it's just a good time frame. Anytime I've tried to work with somebody more frequently than that, it just doesn't last. We always go back to once a month. So I like
it's a good rhythm.
Yeah, and there is usually a fee. For most people who have jobs, it's not exorbitant. So
yeah. And you've made yourself available as a consultant, ministry consultant at Shepherd Heart too. So, and that's one of the ways people can find you is on the website there. So we are really grateful to you and your work. And honored and grateful to know you and to know that you're out there doing good things and helping people become more available to the Spirit and open to listening.
I want to thank you because you've been so supportive and you've been so wonderful to promote so many of us that are doing this kind of work. And I'm envious of what you created, your Shepherd Heart.
Shepherd Heart's purpose is to really care for clergy and congregations, probably through the toughest parts of ministry. Care in a holistic sense, like you would understand as a spiritual director. Our whole being really needs care, and spiritual direction is part of that. And Shepherd Heart tries to nurture care of the whole pastor and the whole church. So thanks for being a part of that. I really appreciate it.
Good future ahead of you because, you know, churches are always in change and they always need someone to walk the path with them.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for your time today, Teresa, and we'll be seeing each other soon. Take care. Bye-bye.